Here we go. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody had a great weekend. I just got home. I went to lunch with my producer. Straighten out over here. And we had a great lunch together. Got some updates going on. You know, what's going on with the show, what's going on with the TikTok stuff, and everything else I'm doing. So we had a good lunch. So I ran a little late. I got home, had technical difficulties. You can see I still don't have a proper intro. But there were some weird things going on. You know, Mercury is in retrograde, so issues, and more issues. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Northern California. We're 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you think you have a paranormal need, we can help you out. It may take us a while to get to you, but we definitely can help you out. Just look us up. We're all over social media. You can just Google us. You'll just find us. Anyway, today is Sunday reading day. I hope everybody had a great weekend. I will not be doing any card readings tonight because it's technically my night off. It's the night I work on my radio stuff. Technically, it's the night I work on my radio stuff. Hey, Kathy, how's it going over Clapper? This will be it for me being live tonight. But I just want to let you guys know how much I appreciate you all, and thank you. Thank you so much. We do have some stuff coming up this week. You know, St. Patrick's Day is tomorrow, and yeah, I'm going to be doing some special stuff tomorrow night for that. And again, I'll be doing readings again tomorrow starting at 7 p.m. Pacific. Today is Sunday, and normally on Sunday what I do, I have a regular radio show that I do that we're trying to get booked up now, working on getting bookings for. But normally on Sunday what I do is I read from a ghost story, and it's usually a true story. Sometimes they're not, sometimes they are. This book in particular is supposed to be a true ghost story. It was written in the 1800s, and the late 1800s. And it's interesting. We've gone through 3 chapters. We're starting chapter 4 tonight. And being the ghost hunter that I am, I've been doing ghost hunting for 25 years. And I've been around that block. Right? And so to me, you know, when I hear them describe this case, and the woman, you know, being 18 years old and just coming into her womanhood, it sounds like, you know, poltergeist activity to me. But I could be wrong. So we're going to find out. But again, I'm going to warn you because this book did take place in the late 1800s. A lot of the woke stuff isn't in here. Okay, I'm going to do my best to clean it up. But if I don't turn me into the internet police. Okay, don't turn me into the internet police. But I think you'll like it. It seems to be a pretty good story. The author of the book, it's called A Haunted House: A True Story. And the author of the book actually lived with the family, so he experienced the things firsthand. And I want to remind everybody over on on TikTok over there, I do have a goal of 60 of those skulls. If you guys can help me with that, that would be great. If not, that's fine too. Like, follow, and share. We want to let people know about this, about our Sunday reading days, because we want to get more people involved with them. Okay, so help me out. Hello, I can see that. I can barely see these things over there. Okay, so if I don't acknowledge you, I'm sorry. But I'm sure there's moderators over there that will help you out. Okay. And if there are gifts that you give, they will thank you. All right, so let's get into it. Chapter 4, I'm going to read for about an hour tonight and see how we do, because I think we're more than halfway through on this book already. So here we go. And like I said, just beware, you know, if I stop and I'm kind of fumbling trying to read stuff, it's because I'm trying to phrase it properly so that we're within, you know, ethical things on it, okay? So here we go. The Walking of the Ghost. When John White took Esther to his house to reside, he performed a charitable deed, which no man in the village but himself had the heart to do. Both he and his good wife showed, by the kindness with which they treated the poor unhappy girl, that heaven had at least inspired 2 hearts with that greatest of all virtues, charity. It was now January 1879, just 4 months since the manifestations first commenced. Esther had been at White's residence for 2 weeks and had not seen anything of the ghost. She had improved very much in that short time. her nervousness having almost subsided, and she was contented and happy. Mrs. White, who found her of great assistance in the house, had become much attached to the girl. I didn't put my chat up here, guys. Let me pop the chat up. There we go. Okay. Had become much attached to the girl, and treated her with the same kindness that she did her own children. Towards the end of the third week, her old enemy, the ghost, returned. While Esther was scrubbing the hall at her new home, she was astonished to see her scrubbing brush disappear from her hand. When the ghost told her that he had taken it, she became very alarmed and screamed for Mrs. White, who, with her daughter Mary, searched the hall for it in vain. After they had abandoned their search, to the great astonishment of all, the brush fell from the ceiling, just grazing Esther's head in its fall. Here was a new manifestation of the ghostly power. He was able to take a solid substance from this material world of ours and render it invisible by taking it into his mysterious state of existence, and, if he could take one object, why not another? If a brush, why not a broom? But why speculate on so great a mystery? The ghost did it, and as we must draw the line somewhere, it is better to draw it here than to allow our minds to become dazed by such fellows as ghosts. Many other remarkable manifestations continued to take place almost daily for the next 2 weeks. The ghost could now tell how much money people had in their pockets, both by knocking and by telling Esther. He would answer any question asked in the above mentioned manner, and behaved himself very well indeed, until the end of the 6th week, when his true devilish nature broke out again. He commenced setting fires around the house, and walking so that he could be heard distinctly. Of course, John White would not run the risk of having his house burned down, so he persuaded Esther to remain during the day in his dining saloon, which stands opposite the well-known bookstore of G.G. Bird on the principal street. While standing behind the counter in the dining saloon, also while she worked in the adjoining kitchen, many new and wonderful things were witnessed by inhabitants of Amherst and by strangers from a distance, and many plans were tried to prevent the manifestations. Among others, someone suggested that if she could stand on glass, they would cease. So pieces of glass were put into her shoes, but as their presence caused her head to ache and her nose to bleed, without stopping the manifestations, the idea was abandoned. One morning, we're crooked on TikTok, wait a minute. Okay. I don't want to drop you guys either. Hang on. Okay, there we go. Let's hope you stay. If you fall, I'm sorry. One morning, the door of the large stove in the kitchen, adjoining the saloon, was opened and shut by the ghost, much to the annoyance of Mr. White, who, with an old axe handle, so braced the door that it could not be moved by any known mundane power, unless the axe handle was first removed. A moment afterwards, however, the ghost, who seemed never to leave Esther's presence while she was in the saloon, lifted the door off its hinges. Okay, now we're dealing with something else. To be able to do that. Yep. Removed the axe handle from the position in which it had been placed, and, after throwing them some distance, I'll explain later, into the air, let both fall to the floor with a tremendous crash. Mr. White was speechless with astonishment, and immediately called in Mr. W.H. Rogers, Inspector of Fisheries for Nova Scotia. After bracing the door as before, the same wonderful manifestation was repeated, in the presence of Mr. Rogers. On another occasion, a clasp knife belonging to little Fred, Mr. White's son, was taken from his hand by the ghost, who instantly stabbed Esther in the back with it, leaving the knife sticking in the wound, which bled profusely. Fred, after drawing the knife from the wound, wiped it, closed it, and put it in his pocket. The ghost took it from his pocket, and, in a second, stuck it in the same wound. Fred again obtained possession of the knife, and this time hid it so that it could not be found, even by a ghost. There was something still more remarkable, however, about the following manifestation. Some person tried the experiment of placing 3 or 4 large iron spikes on Esther's lap while she was seated in the dining saloon. To the astonishment of everybody, the spikes were not removed by the ghost, but instead became too hot to be handled with comfort, and a second afterwards were thrown by the ghost to the far end of the saloon, a distance of 20 feet. During her stay at the saloon, the ghost commenced to move the furniture about in the broad daylight. On one occasion, a large box, weighing 50 pounds, was moved a distance of 15 feet without the slightest visible cause. This is where I see where this is supposed to be. They were saying it was demonic. Okay. The very loud knocking commenced again and was heard by crowds of people, the saloon being continually filled with visitors. Among other well-known inhabitants of Amherst who saw the wonders of this period, I may mention William Hilson, Daniel Morrison, Robert Hutchinson, who is John White's son-in-law, and J. Albert Black, Esquire, editor of the Amherst Gazette. Towards the latter part of March, Esther went to St. John, New Brunswick, and while there was the guest of Captain James Beck, and remained at his house for 3 weeks under the protection of his wife. Her case was investigated by a party of gentlemen, well known in St. John as men whose minds have a scientific turn. Dr. Alward, Mr. Amos Fales, Mr. Alex Christie, Mr. Ritchie, and many others witnessed the manifestations, and talked with the ghost by the aid of the knocks on the wall and furniture. And, strange to relate, other ghosts came and conversed also. Among them, one who said his name was Peter Cox, and another who gave the name of Maggie Fisher. All claimed to have lived on the earth before they entered the land of ghosts, but none were apparently as strong and healthy as the old original fire fiend of the cottage, who now gave the name of Bob Nickel, and said that when he lived on earth, he had been a shoemaker. The ghost, who called himself Peter Cox, claimed to be a relation of Esther's, and said he had been in Ghostland about 40 years. He was a quiet old fellow, and did all he could to prevent Bob Nickel and Maggie Fisher from breaking the articles which they threw, and from using profane language, a habit in which they were fond of indulging. Dr. Alward and his scientific friends also conversed with the ghosts by calling over the alphabet, the ghost knocking at the correct letters, and, in that way, long communications were spelled out to the satisfaction of those present. After remaining in St. John about 3 weeks, Esther returned to Amherst and accepted an invitation to visit Mr. and Mrs. Van Amberg, who reside about 3 miles from the village. She remained 8 weeks with them, during which period the ghosts allowed her to enjoy the calm repose of a life in the woods, the Van Amberg farm being literally situated in the woods. At the expiration of the 8th week, she returned to Amherst and went back to Dan's cottage to reside, being employed during the day in White's dining saloon. The manifestations soon commenced again, and were as powerful as when the author commenced his investigation of the case. Chapter 5, The Author and the Ghosts. I closed my engagement with the dramatic company of which I was a member in Newfoundland, and went to Amherst to expose, if possible, Esther Cox, the great Amherst mystery. Where occasion requires allusion to myself, I shall simply say the author. At 7 o'clock on the morning of June 21st, 1879, as the sun was shining brightly and the cool breeze was blowing from the bay, the author entered the haunted house. After placing his umbrella in a corner of the dining room and his satchel on the table, he seated himself in one of the easy chairs to await results. Esther and Olive were present. He had been in the room about 5 minutes when, to his great astonishment, his umbrella was thrown a distance of 15 feet, going over his head in its flight. At the same instant, a large carving knife came jumping over the girl's head and fell near him. Not at all pleased with this kind of a reception on the part of the ghosts, he left the room and went into the parlor, taking his satchel with him, and there sat down, paralyzed with wonder and astonishment. He had been seated only a moment when his satchel was thrown a distance of 10 feet. At the same instant, a large chair came flying across the room, striking the one on which he was seated, nearly knocking it from under him. It suddenly occurred to him that he would take a walk during which he could admire the beauties of the village. On his return to the cottage, the ghosts commenced their work again, with redoubled violence. He had no sooner entered the house than all the chairs in the parlor, and there were 7 by actual count, fell over. Concluding not to remain in that room, he went to the dining room, when the chairs in that, his favorite room in every house, went through the same performance. Feeling hungry, not yet having had his breakfast, he sat down to a good substantial meal. Esther, sitting directly opposite, after pouring out his coffee, she handed it to him with the remark, "Oh, you'll soon get used to them. I don't think they like you." No, he replied. I do not think they do either. In fact, I'm satisfied that they do not. But, having come here to investigate, I shall remain until they drive me from the house. While eating breakfast, the ghost commenced to hammer on the table. By the system in use by the family, when conversing with them, he carried on a long conversation, they answering by knocks on the bottom of the table. Before entering into conversation, however, he sat so that Esther's hands and feet were in full view. The ghost told the number of his watch, also the dates of coins in his pocket, and beat correct time when he whistled the tune of Yankee Doodle Dandy. Chairs continued to fall over until dinner, during which there was a slight cessation of manifestations. After dinner, the author lay down upon the parlor sofa to take a nap, as is his custom, in the afternoon. Esther came into the room for a newspaper. He watched her very closely, keeping one eye open and the other one next her shut, so that she would think he was asleep. While watching her intently to see that she did not throw anything herself, a large glass paperweight, weighing fully a pound, came whizzing through the air from the far corner of the room, where it had been on a shelf, a distance of fully 15 feet from the sofa. Fortunately for the author, instead of striking his head, which was evidently the intention of the ghost who threw it, it struck the arm of the sofa with great force, rebounding to a chair, upon which it remained after it had spun around for a second or two. Being very anxious to witness the manifestations, he requested Esther to remain in the room, which she did. After seating herself in the rocking chair, little George came into the room when she placed the little fellow on her lap and sang to him. As the author lay there watching her, one of the child's copper-toed shoes was taken off by a ghost and thrown at him with great force, striking his head. The place struck was very sore for 3 or 4 days. The balance of the day passed quietly away. Evening came, and the author had a good night's rest in the haunted house, of which he had heard so much. The next day, being Sunday, everything was peaceful in the cottage, though why the ghost should respect the Sabbath, the author has never been able to ascertain. However, they always remained quiet on that day. On Monday morning, the ghosts commenced their mad pranks again, and seemed ready for anything. At breakfast, the lid of the stone china sugar bowl disappeared from the table, and, in about 10 minutes, fell from the ceiling. After breakfast, over went the table. Then the chairs all fell over, and several large mats were pitched about the room. The author immediately left the room and went into the parlor, when, to his astonishment, a flower pot containing a large plant in full bloom was taken from its place in the bay window, and set down in the middle of the room, and a large tin can filled with water was brought from the kitchen and placed beside it. During the afternoon, a large inkstand and 2 empty bottles were thrown at him. The ghost also undressed little George, and, as if to make a final climax to the day's performance, Bob, the head ghost, started a small bonfire upstairs, and he and the other ghosts piled all the chairs in the parlor, one on top of the other, until they made a pile of about 6 feet in height, when, as if in sport, they pulled out those underneath, letting all the others fall to the floor with a crash. On Tuesday morning, when the author took his seat at the breakfast table, he placed a sugar bowl lid beside his plate, so that he might have his eyes on it. In a second it disappeared, and fell in exactly 8 minutes by the clock from the ceiling, a distance of fully 20 feet from the table. The ghosts got under the table, as on the previous morning, and were so obliging as to produce any sounds called for, such as an exact imitation of the sawing of wood, of drumming, and of washing on a washboard. During the morning, several knives were thrown at him. A large crock of salt was taken from the kitchen dresser and placed on the dining room table. The tea kettle was taken from the stove by one of the ghosts and placed out in the yard, as was also the beefsteak pan and all, which was frying on the stove. And after dinner, the table was upset. During the afternoon, while in the parlor, the author made the acquaintance of all the ghosts: Bob Nickel, the chief ghost; Maggie Fisher, another ghost almost as bad as Bob; Peter Cox, a quiet old fellow of very little use as a ghost, because he never tries to break chairs, etc.; Mary Fisher, who says she is Maggie's sister; Jane Nichol, and Eliza McNeil. The three last are no good as ghosts, as all they do is stalk around the house and occasionally upset something. As there were only 6 ghosts all told, and they were all present, the author asked them numerous questions, all of which were answered by loud knocks on the floor or on the wall, just as he requested, all seeming anxious to converse. Okay. The first question the author asked was, "Have you all lived on the earth?" Answer, "Yes." "Have you seen God?" Answer, "No." "Are you in heaven?" Answer, "No." "Are you in hell?" Answer, "Yes." "Have you seen the devil?" A very loud "Yes." Many other questions were answered, but the answers were not worth repeating. At the conclusion of the interview, one of the ghosts threw the author's bottle of ink from the table to the floor, spilling the contents on the carpet. The next day, as the author and Esther were entering the parlor, both saw a chair fall over and instantly jump up again. Neither the author nor Esther were within 5 feet of the chair at the time. During the whole of the next day, the ghost stuck pins into Esther's person. These pins appeared to come out of the air, and the author pulled about 30 from various parts of her body during the day. In the afternoon, the family cat was thrown a distance of 5 feet by one of the ghosts, and almost had a fit from fright. She remained in the yard for the balance of the day, and ever afterwards, while in the house, seemed to be on the lookout for ghosts, possibly. She saw and heard them on several occasions afterwards, for her tail often became quite large, as cats' tails always do when they're frightened or angry, after which she would leave, and in a hurry. The author saw Esther coming down the stairs late in the afternoon, and when she had reached the hall, a chair from his room came down after her. The only other person in the cottage at the time was Olive, and she was at that instant in the kitchen. On June 26th, 2 or 3 matches fell from the ceiling at the author's feet. Being a great smoker, he requested the ghost to throw down a few more, which they did. He would simply say, "Bob, I would like a few matches, if you please." When down they would come from the ceiling. 45 were thrown during the day, and on another day, during the afternoon, 49 fell to the floor. It must be remembered that all the manifestations witnessed by the author took place in broad daylight, and that the only other persons present were the various members of the family. On June 28th, the sound of a trumpet was heard by the author and all the family. It continued to be blown about the house from early morning until late in the evening. The sound was very distinct, and was at times close to their ears. Late in the evening, Bob let the trumpet fall in one of the rooms. It is composed of some metal very similar to German silver, and is now in the possession of the author, who intends to place it in a museum on his return to the United States. Where the ghost got it, no one knows. It had never been seen in Amherst, as far as had been ascertainable, until it fell upon the floor, and its true origin will doubtless always remain a mystery. It is hardly necessary that the author should weary the reader with a minute account of the manifestations produced by these ghosts during his residence of 6 weeks in the haunted house. He could easily fill a book containing twice the number of pages that this one does, with an account of what was done by the ghosts alone, without mentioning the name of a single living individual except Esther. But I suppose the reader by this time is ready to cry quantum sufficit. So by referring to a few more facts, he will end this chapter. One afternoon, while Esther was out walking, she called on Reverend R.A. Temple. During the visit, he prayed with her, and also advised her to pray for herself. On her return to the cottage, one of the ghosts, either Bob or Maggie, cut her on the head with an old bone from the yard, and a moment afterwards stabbed her in the face with a fork. While the author lived in the house, scarcely a day passed that some article was not thrown by the ghosts. They would often steal small articles and keep them secreted, heavens only knows where, for days at a time, and then unexpectedly let them fall in one of the rooms to the amazement of everyone. In that way, shoes and stockings, knives, forks, and other articles too numerous to mention, would be missed, sometimes for weeks, and on one occasion some copper coins were taken from Dan's pocket and placed upon the author's knee. It was a common thing for the ghost to throw knives at the author, But fortunately, they were all dull, and he was never cut. He was, however, often struck by small articles, never sufficiently hard, however, to draw blood. During his stay in the house, Esther often went into a state very similar to the mesmeric sleep, during which she talked with people invisible to all present, among others, her dead mother. On coming out of this strange state, she always said she had been to heaven among the angels. On several occasions, Bob, the head ghost, tormented her, so at night that it was with difficulty that she could remain in bed. On one particular occasion, the author was called up by Dan at midnight, so that he might behold for himself what was going on. After dressing, he went into Esther's room, and was horrified by the sight which met his gaze. There, upon the bed, lay the poor unhappy girl, swollen to an enormous size, her body moving about the bed as if Beelzebub himself were in her, while between her gasps for breath she exclaimed, in agonizing sobs, "Oh, my God, I wish I were dead. I wish I were dead." "Oh, don't say that, Esther," fled Olive. "Don't say that." "Now, Mr. Hubbell," said Jane to the author, "you see how much she suffers." "Yes, I see," said Hubbell. "But let us endeavor to hold her, so that this fiend cannot move her about on the bed, and then, perhaps, she will not suffer so much." So Dan himself tried to hold her so that she could not be moved, but in vain. "Well," said Hubbell, "one ghost is certainly stronger than two men. Are you sure nothing can be done to relieve her?" "No," replied Olive. "Dr. Caree has tried everything without affording her the slightest relief. Medicine has no more effect on her than water." Jane, Oliver, Dan, and the author remained up with her for about 3 hours, during which time she continued to move about the bed, after which the ghost left her, and she sank from sheer exhaustion into a state of lethargy. She had several attacks of this kind during the author's residence in the cottage, and on one occasion she was seen by Mr. G. Bird, Mr. James P. Dunlap, Mr. Day, Miss Purdy, and several ladies. On another occasion by Dr. E.D. McLean, Mr. Fowler, and Mr. Sleep. Towards the latter part of July, the manifestations became so powerful that it was no longer safe to have Esther in the house. Fires were continually being started, the walls were being broken by the chairs, the bedclothes being pulled off in the daytime, heavy sofas turned upside down, knives and forks thrown with such force that they would stick into doors, food disappeared from the table, finger marks became visible in the butter, and, worse than all, strange voices could be heard calling the inmates by name in the broad daylight of day. This was too much. If the ghosts continued to gain in strength, they would take possession of the house, and all in it. For there were 6 ghosts, and only 5 persons in the flesh, all told. As follows: Dan, Olive, Jane, Esther, and the author, not, of course, counting the 2 children, William Cox and John Teed, having left the house before Esther went to St. John, literally driven away by the ghosts. There was but one remedy, and that was that Esther Cox should leave the house, even though her sisters loved her dearly. Simple-hearted village maiden. Fate decreed that she should be torn from their home, but not from their hearts, for the simple reason that her room was far more agreeable than her company. So one morning, after packing up all her worldly possessions, she kissed the little boys, embraced her sisters, shook hands with the rest, bade them all farewell, and departed, never to return. Chapter 6, Conclusion. Esther is living with her friends, the Van Ambergs, on their farm in the woods. The ghosts do not torment her now. With the Van Ambergs, she has a quiet, peaceful home. One thing is certain. If she returned to Dan's cottage, manifestations would, in a short time, become as powerful as ever, and heaven only knows where the matter would end. The author went to see her at the farm on August 1st, 1879, and found her making a patchwork quilt on which she stopped working every few minutes to play with the little children. She informed him that she read her Bible regularly every day and was contented and happy. Before departing, he advised her to pray earnestly that she might never again be possessed by devils. She promised to take his advice, So hoping that her prayers would be answered, he bade her farewell forever. In Dan's little cottage, all is now harmony and peace. Pretty Jane still tends her plants with loving care. Olive works as hard as ever, and so does honest Dan. And there may they re, there may they reside for years, and there may they reside for years to come, enjoying the blessings which the virtuous always receive from the hands of Providence. Reader, a word. This account of the haunted house in which Esther Cox suffered so much, and the author had such a remarkable experience, is no fanciful creation of the imagination, but really what it is claimed to be, a true ghost story. The end. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is we could talk about this a little bit. I'm going to try and find another book right now because this ended. So let me get into Gutenberg and see what I can track down for you guys. Talk about this. When I first started, like I said, the description they gave of this young girl. Let me get in here. There it goes, Gutenberg Project. Gutenberg Project. I'm getting these books to let you guys know from the Gutenberg Project. They're out of copyright. So this is where I've been getting them. See what we can find. But anyway, when I first, this Project Gutenberg, when I first started listening to this, and like I said, they described her as coming into life, as coming into, as coming into age. And what that generally means is puberty. And I admit I am an old school ghost hunter. Let me find the search here for this. Quick search. There we go. Search and browse. Let's see if I can find another one here real quick. Anyway, and I was leaning more towards poltergeist, but the honest thing is over the years doing this and ghost stories. And one of the things that we talk about with clients when we go out to somebody's house and we're looking into, okay, we did that one. How about we do some Irish ghost stories, you guys? Let's do some Irish ghost stories. St. Patrick's Day. There we go. I'm good for it. Let's go grab it. Let me download the thing. Read online, web, Kindle, older Kindle. Go. See if we can get it downloaded. See if I can find it. Okay, yeah, let's go. Download again. Let's see if I can find it. It's True Irish Ghost Stories. Is that one of the things that we ask people is, are there any objects that are being thrown around? And sometimes they'll say yes. And the main thing that we always ask, let's see if I can get back in there now. If I can find it. Sometimes I can't get it through downloads. I have to do it a different way with this. And then getting out of here is always gotta get your license. Anyway, that's one of the things we look for is how heavy are the objects that are being moved. How heavy are the objects that... And one of the things that we go through, like, that's why I was oohing and on there. Because if something's more than 2 or 3 or 5 pounds, even 5 pounds is where I put the limit. If it's a 5-pound object or heavier, ghosts can't do that. Poltergeists don't do that. And so as I read on today and I saw it saying, the book saying definitely that the objects that it was ripping, it was ripping the door off its hinges. Yeah, that's bad news. That's something demonic. And it's interesting because once she left the house, it ended. And I find, that's another thing that... All right, let me find my library. Somewhere there's a library on here. That's not what I want. Get back in the library. I'm going to come out of this and then we're going to repower up. That's what I'll do. Let's do a restart. See if it'll pop me in the library. So that's one of the things I look for. When I go out, that's one of our main questions is what have they been throwing? Leprechaun ghosts. Yeah! So I'm going to try to get some leprechaun ghosts. Just hang on. Give me a second. It's an older tablet, but we'll get it powered up. So give me a second. Because I have to download it. It has to come in from the library. I'm just going to do a restart. There we go. So That's one of the things I ask is how heavy the objects are. And that's a tip off to what we're dealing with. Because like I said, if a ghost cannot lift more than 5 or 6 pounds. And so if you have something that's throwing stuff that's heavier than 5 or 6 pounds, or again, like in that case we had out in Rockland, where the the door to the dryer, which the guy didn't tell us till after the investigation, until we did the investigation, where the drawer to the dryer in the laundry room was ripped clean off the hinges. That's telling right there. I mean, that tells you right there it's something that has to have enormous power to do that kind of thing. And so as I was reading this book, and I kept reading the book, as we were reading today, that's where everything changed, was when I heard, let me grab some water while that tablet, there it goes. That's where everything changed as far as my thoughts on the story, because swiped up to unlock. Come on. Okay. Okay. But that's where it changed at that point for me, was because this thing was ripping full door twice off its hinges. Okay, here we go. Let's see if I got it. Okay, True Haunted House. Sometimes I have to go find it. Give me a second, see if I can find it here. Sometimes I have to do other stuff with it to do it. Yeah, I know it stopped. Okay. So we're looking for ghost stories, Irish. It's amazing how much we've read. Alright, let's see if I can find it. It should be here. Pocketbook. Let me open that up. I'm looking at files. Here we go. Let's see if it's there. Where are you? There it is. Okay, so here we go. We can start. New book. True Irish Ghost Stories. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that. That's my thoughts on that. Okay, here we go. So since it's St. Patrick's Day tomorrow. Whoa, this is a weird format. Alright, since it's St. Patrick's Day tomorrow, let's start this book, okay? Oh, what is this? We gotta go to the page. It just jumped on me. Hang on. Okay. I have to make this big enough so blind people can read. That would be me. Let the thing adjust. But anyway, that's my thoughts on that. As they said it was demonic. It's obvious that it was demonic. Okay. So chapter 1. We're going to start this today. I'll read another 20 minutes. So it's True Irish Ghost Stories. Okay? We shall continue. And it just jumped. Hang on. Remember, there's Irish. It's going to be written in Irish, so you guys can laugh at me too while I'm reading it. Okay. Here we go. At least the contents. All right. Haunted houses in or near Dublin. So here we go. Of all species of ghostly phenomena, that commonly known as haunted houses appeals most to the ordinary person. There's something very eerie in being shut up within the four walls of a house with a ghost. The poor human being is placed at such a disadvantage. If we know that a gateway or road or field has the reputation of being haunted, we can, in nearly every case, make a detour and so avoid the unpleasant locality. But the presence of a ghost in a house creates a very different state of affairs. It appears and disappears at its own sweet will, with a total disregard for our feelings. It seems to be as much part and parcel of the domicile as the staircase or the hall door, and consequently, nothing short of leaving the house or pulling it down. Both of these solutions are not always predictable or practical. Will free us absolutely of the unwelcome presence. There is also something so natural, and at the same time so unnatural, in seeing a door open when we know that no human hand rests on the doorknob, or in the hearing the sound of footsteps, light and heavy, and feeling that it cannot be attributed to the feet of mortal man or woman. Or perhaps a form appears in a room, standing, sitting, or walking. In fact, situated in its three dimensions apparently as an ordinary being of flesh and blood, until it proves its unearthly nature by vanishing before our astonished eyes. Or perhaps we're asleep in bed. The room is shrouded in darkness, and our recumbent attitude, together with the weight of bedclothes, hampers our movements and probably makes us more cowardly. A man will meet pain or danger boldly if he is standing upright, occupying the erect position, which is his lord of creation. But his courage does not do so well if he be supine. We are awakened suddenly by the feel that some superhuman presence is in the room. We are transfixed with terror. We cannot find either the bell rope or the matches. While we dare not leap out of bed and make a rush for the door, lest we should encounter we know not what. In an agony of fear, we feel it moving towards us. It approaches closer and yet closer to the bed. And, for what may not even then happen, we must refer our readers to the pages of this book. But the skeptical reader will say, it's all very well, but there's no haunted houses. All these alleged strange happenings are due to a vivid imagination, or else to rats and mice. Parentheses. The question of deliberate and conscious fraud may be rejected in almost every instance. This simple solution has been put forward so often that it should infallibly have solved the problem long ago. But will such a reader explain how it is that the noise made by rats and mice can resemble slow, heavy footsteps, or else take the form of a human being seen by several persons? Or how our imagination can cause doors to open and shut, or else create a conglomeration of noises which physically would be beyond the power of ordinary individuals to reproduce? Whatever may be the ultimate explanation, we feel that there is a great deal in the words quoted by Professor Barrett. In spite of all reasonable skepticism, it is difficult to avoid accepting, at least provisionally, the conclusion that there are, in a certain sense, haunted houses, i.e., that there are houses in which similar quasi-human apparitions have occurred at different times to different inhabitants, under the circumstances which exclude the hypotheses of suggestion or expectation. We must now turn to the subject of this chapter. Mrs. G. Kelly, a lady well known to musical circles in Dublin, sends as her own personal experience the following tale of a most quiet haunting, in which the spectral charwoman does not seem to have entirely laid aside all her mundane habits. Remember, these have been translated from over the years. So, good evening. Good evening over there. Good evening, everybody. Hope you stick with me. So, like it says, charwoman. We don't know if that's the spelling, but they're trying to translate these things out of old texts and stuff. My first encounter with a ghost occurred about 20 years ago. On that occasion, I was standing in my kitchen in Bumpa Square when a woman, whom I was afterwards to see many times, walked down the stairs into the room. Having heard the footsteps outside, I was not in the least perturbed, but turned to look to see who it was, and found myself looking at a tall, stout, elderly woman wearing a bonnet and old-fashioned mantle. She had gray hair and a benign and admirable expression. We stood gazing at each other while one could count 20. At first I was not at all frightened, but gradually, as I stood looking at her, an uncomfortable feeling, increasing to terror, came over me. This caused me to retreat farther and farther back until I had my back against the wall, and then the apparition slowly faded. This feeling of terror, due perhaps to the unexpectedness of her appearance, always overcame me on the subsequent occasions on which I saw her. These occasions numbered 12 or 15, and I have seen her in every room in the house, and at every hour of the day, during a period of about 10 years. The last time she appeared was 10 years ago. My husband and I had just returned from a concert at which he had been singing, and we sat for some time over supper, talking about the events of the evening. When at last I rose to leave the room and open the dining room door, I found my old lady standing on the mat outside, with her head bent towards the door in the attitude of listening. I called out loudly, and my husband rushed to my side. That was the last time I have ever seen her. One strange thing, we'll just skip the word, of this spectral visit was a strong objection to disorder and untidiness of any kind, or even to an alteration in the general routine of the house. For instance, she showed her disapproval of any stranger coming to sleep by turning the chairs face downwards on the floor in the room they were to occupy. I well remember one of our guests having gone to his room one evening for something he had forgotten, remarking, on coming downstairs again. Well, you people have an extraordinary manner of arranging your furniture. I have nearly broken my bones over one of the bedroom chairs, which was turned down on the floor. As my husband and I had restored that chair twice already to its proper position during the day, we were not much surprised at his remarks, although we did not enlighten him. The whole family had been disturbed by a peculiar knocking which occurred in various rooms in the house, frequently on the door or wall, but sometimes on the furniture, quite close to where we had been sitting. This was evidently loud enough to be heard in the next house, for our next door neighbor once again asked my husband why he selected such curious hours for hanging his pictures. Another strange and fairly frequent occurrence was the following. I had got a set of skunk furs, which I fancied had an unpleasant odor, as this fur sometimes has, and at night I used to take it from my wardrobe and lay it on a chair in the drawing room, which was next to my bedroom. The first time that I did this, on going to the drawing room, I found, to my surprise, my muff in one corner and my stole in another. Not for a moment, suspecting a supernatural agent, I asked my servant about it, and she assured me that she had not been in the room. Whereupon I determined to test the matter, which I did by putting in the furs late at night, and taking care of that, I was the first to enter the room in the morning. Invariably, I found that they had been disturbed. The following strange and pathetic incident occurred in a well-known square in the north side of the city. In or about 100 years ago, a young officer was ordered to Dublin, and took a house there for himself and his family. He sent on his wife and 2 children, intending to join them in the course of a few days. When the latter and the nurse arrived, they found only the old charwoman in the house, and she left shortly after their arrival. Finding that something was needed, the nurse went out to purchase it. On her return, she asked the mother, were the children all right, as she had seen 2 ghostly forms flit past her on the doorstep. The mother answered that she believed they were, but on going up to the nursery, they found both the children with their throats unalived. We're going to leave it at that. The murder was never brought to justice, and no motive was ever discovered for the crime. The unfortunate mother went mad, and it's said that an eerie feeling still clings to the house, while 2 little heads are sometimes seen at the window of the room where the deed was committed. A most weird experience fell to the lot of Major McCraker, who was contributed by him to Real Ghost Stories, the celebrated Christmas number of the Review Reviews. He says, in the end, excuse me for that, my allergies. In the end of 1871, I went over to Ireland to visit a relative living in a square in the north side of Dublin. In January 1872, the husband of my relative fell ill. I sat up with him for several nights, and at last, as he seemed better, I went to bed and directed the footman to call me if anything went wrong. I soon fell asleep, but some time after was awakened by a push on the left shoulder. I started up and said, "Is there anything wrong?" I got no answer, but immediately received another push. I got annoyed and said, "Can you not speak, man, and tell me if there is anything wrong?" Still no answer, and I had a feeling I was going to get another push when I suddenly turned around and caught a human hand, warm, plump, and soft. I said, "Who are you?" But I got no answer. I then tried to pull the person towards me, but could not do so. I then said, "I will know who you are," and having the hand tight in my right hand, with my left hand I felt the wrist and arm enclosed, as it seemed to me, in a tight-fitting sleeve of some winter material with a linen cuff. But when I got to the elbow, all trace of an arm ceased. I was so astounded that I let the hand go, and, just then, the clock struck 2. Including the mistress of the house, there were 5 females in the establishment, and I can assert that the hand belonged to none of them. When I reported the adventure, the servants exclaimed, "Oh, it must have been the master's old Aunt Betty, who lived for many years in the upper part of that house, and had died over 50 years ago at a great age." I afterwards heard that the room in which I felt the hand had been considered haunted, and very curious noises and peculiar incidents occurred, such as the bedclothes torn off, and on. One lady got a slap in the face from some invisible hand, and when she lit her candle, she saw as if something opaque fell and jumped off the bed. A general officer, a brother of the lady, slept there 2 nights, but preferred going to a hotel to remaining on the third night. He never would say what he heard or saw, but always said the room was uncanny. I slept for months in the room afterwards, and was never in the least disturbed. Okay. A truly terrifying sight was witnessed by a clergyman in a schoolhouse a good many years ago. This cleric was a curate of a Dublin parish, but resided with his parents some distance out of town, in the direction of Mullahead. Not infrequently happened that he had to hold meetings in the evenings, and on such occasions, as his home was so far away, and as the modern convenience of tramcars was not then known, he used to sleep in the schoolroom, a large bare room where the meetings were held. He had made a sleeping apartment for himself by placing a pole across one end of the room, on which he had rigged up 2 curtains, which, when drawn together, met in the middle. One night he'd been holding some meetings, and when everybody had left, he locked up the empty schoolhouse, and went to bed. It was a bright moonlit night, and every object could be seen perfectly clear. Scarcely had he got into bed when he became conscious of some invisible presence. Then he saw the curtains agitated at one end, as if hands were grasping them on the outside. In an agony of terror, he watched these hands groping along outside the curtains till they reached the middle. The curtains were then drawn a little apart, and a face appeared, in an awful, evil face, with an expression of wickedness and hate upon it which no words could describe. It looked at him for a few moments, then drew back again, and the curtains closed. The clergyman had sufficient courage left to leap out of bed and make a thorough examination of the room. But, as he expected, he found no one. He dressed himself as quickly as possible, walked home, and never again slept a night in that schoolroom. The following tale, sent by Mr. E.B. de Lacy, contains a most extraordinary and unsatisfactory element of mystery. He says, "When I was a boy, I lived in the suburbs, and used to come in every morning to school in the city. My way lay through a certain street in which stood a very dismal semi-detached house, which, I may say, was closed up regularly about every 6 months. I would see new tenants coming into it, and then in a few months it would be to let again. This went on for 8 or 9 years, and I often wondered what was the reason. On inquiring one day from a friend, I was told that it had a reputation of being haunted. A few years later, I entered business in a certain office, and one day it fell to my lot to have to call on a lady who at that particular period was the tenant of the haunted house. When we had transacted our business, she informed me that she was about to leave. Knowing the reputation of the house, and being desirous of investigating a ghost story, I asked her if she would give me the history of the house, as far as she knew it, which she very kindly did as follows. About 40 years ago, the house was left by will to a gentleman named Blah. He lived in it for a short time, when he suddenly went mad, and had to be put in an asylum. Upon this, his agents let the house to a lady. Apparently nothing unusual happened for some time, but a few months later, as she went down one morning to a room beyond the kitchen, she found the cook, unalived in the ceiling. Okay, we're going to leave that. After the inquest, the lady gave up the house. It was then closed up for some time, but was again advertised to let, and a caretaker, a woman, was put into it. One night about 1 o'clock, a constable, going his rounds, heard someone calling for help from the house, and found the caretaker of the sill of one of the windows. And found the caretaker on the sill of one of the windows, holding on as best she could. He told her to go in and open the hall door to let him in, but she refused to enter the room again. He forced open the door and succeeded in dragging the woman back into the room, only to find she had gone mad. Again the house was shut up, and again it was let, this time to a lady on a 5-year lease. However, after a few months' residence, she looked it up, she locked it up, and went away. On her friends asking her why she did so, she replied that she would rather pay the whole 5 years' rent than live in it by herself, or allow anyone else to do so, but would give no other reason. I believe I was the next person to take this house, said the lady who narrated the story to me. I took it about 18 months ago on a 3 years lease in the hopes of making money by taking in boarders. But I am now giving it up because none of them will stay more than a week or two. They do not give any definite reason as to why they're leaving. They are careful to state that it is not because they have any fault to find with me or my domestic arrangements, but they merely say they do not like the rooms. The rooms themselves, as you can see, are good, spacious, and well lighted. I have had all classes of professional men. One of the last was a barrister, and he said that he had no fault to find except that he did not like the rooms. I myself do not believe in ghosts, and I have never seen anything strange here or elsewhere. And if I had known the house had the reputation of being haunted, I never would have rented it. Marsh's library, that quaint old-world repository of ponderous tomes, is reputed to be haunted by the ghost of its founder, Primate Narcissus Marsh. He is said to frequent the inner gallery, which contains what was formerly his own private library. He moves in and out amongst the cases, taking down books from the shelves and occasionally throwing them down on the reader's desk as if in anger. However, he always leaves things in perfect order. The late Mr., who for some years lived in the librarian's room underneath, was a firm believer in this ghost and said he frequently heard noises, which could only be accounted for by the presence of a nocturnal visitor. The present tenant is more skeptical. The story goes that Marsh's niece eloped from the palace, and was married in a tavern to the curate of Chapelzoid. She is reported to have written a note consenting to the elopement, and to have then placed it in one of her uncle's books, to which her lover had access, and where he found it. As a punishment for his lack of vigilance, the archbishop is said to be condemned to hunt for the note until he finds it. Hence, the ghost. The ghost of a deceased canon was seen in one of the Dublin cathedrals by several. Okay, there's a new story. That's cool. Next story. The ghost of a deceased canon was seen in one of the Dublin cathedrals by several independent witnesses, one of whom, a lady, gives her own experience as follows. Canon Blah was a personal friend of mine, and we had many times discussed ghosts and spiritualism, in which he was a profound believer, having had many supernatural experiences himself. It was during the Sunday morning service in the cathedral that I saw my friend, who had been dead for 2 years, sitting inside the communion rails. I was so much astonished at the flesh and blood appearance of the figure that I took off my glasses and wiped them with my handkerchief, at the same time looking away from him down the church. On looking back again, he was still there, and continued to sit there for about 10 or 12 minutes, after which he faded away. I remarked a change in his personal appearance, which was that his beard was longer and whiter than when I had known him. In fact, such a change as would have occurred in life in the space of 2 years. Having told my husband of the occurrence on our way home, he remembered having heard some talk of an appearance of this clergyman in the cathedral since his death. He hurried back to the afternoon service and asked the robestresses if anybody had seen him. She informed him that she had, and that he had also been seen by one of the sextons of the cathedral. I mention this because, in describing his personal appearance, she had remarked the same change as I had with regard to the beard. Okay. Some years ago, a family had a very uncanny experience in a house in Rathgar, and subsequently in another in Rathmines. These were communicated by one of the young ladies to Mrs. M. A. Wilkins, who published them in the Journal of the American S.P.R., from which they are here taken. The Rathgar house had a basement passage leading to a door into the yard, and along the passage her mother and the children used to hear dragging, limping steps, and the latch of the door rattling, but no one could ever be found when the search was made. The house bells were old and all in a row, and On one occasion, they all rang, apparently of their own accord. The lady narrator used to sleep in the back drawing room, and always, when the light was put out, she heard strange noises, as if someone was going round the room rubbing paper along the wall, while she often had the feeling that a person was standing beside her bed. A cousin, who was a nurse, once slept with her, and also noticed these strange noises. On one occasion, this room was given up to a very matter-of-fact young man to sleep in, and the next morning he said that the room was very strange with queer noises in it. Here's a footnote for September 1913. Her mother also had an extraordinary experience in the same house. One evening she had just put the baby to bed when she heard a voice calling, "Mother." She left the bedroom and called to her daughter, who was in a lower room. "What do you want?" But the girl replied that she had not called her, and then, in her turn, asked her mother if she had been in the front room, for she had just heard a noise as if someone was trying to fasten the inside bars of the shutters across. But her mother had been upstairs and no one was in the front room. The experiences in the Rathmines' house were of a similar auditory nature, i.e. the young ladies heard their names called, though it was found that no one in the house had done so. Okay, I'll continue with this next section and then we'll call it because it's already 6:11. Hope you guys are enjoying these. This is kind of fun. Next week I'll try and get some Celtic music going in behind here for us all. Occasionally, it happens that ghosts inspire a lawsuit. In the 17th century, they were to be found actively urging the adoption of legal proceedings. But in the 19th and 20th centuries, they play a more passive part. A case about a haunted house that took place in Dublin in the year 1885, in which the ghost may be said to have won. Mr. Waldron, a solicitor's clerk, sued his next-door neighbor, one Mr. Kiernan, a mate in the merchant service, to recover £500 or shillings for damages done, I think it's shillings, done to his house. I think it's shillings. Kiernan altogether denied the charges, but asserted that Waldron's house was notoriously haunted. Witnesses proved that every night, from August 1884 to January 1885, stones were thrown at the windows and doors, and extraordinary and inexplicable occurrences constantly took place. Mrs. Waldron, wife of the plaintiff, swore that one night she saw one of the panes of glass of a certain window cut through with a diamond, and a white hand inserted through the hole. She at once caught up a billhook and aimed a blow at the hand, cutting off one of the fingers. This finger could not be found, nor were any traces of blood seen. A servant of hers was sorely persecuted by noises and the sound of footsteps. Mr. Waldron, with the aid of detectives and policemen, endeavored to find out the cause, but with no success. The witnesses in this case were closely cross-examined, but without shaking their testimony. The facts appeared to be proved, so the jury found for Kiernan, the defendant. At least 20 persons had testified on oath to the fact that the house had been known to have been haunted. Footnote number 2. Okay. You guys want me to go on with this? You guys want me to continue for a while longer? Hey, Mr. Ghost. Okay, I'll go a while longer. We'll go till 6:30. Before leaving the city and its immediate surroundings, we must relate the story of an extraordinary ghost, somewhat lacking in good manners, yet not without a certain distorted sense of humor. Absolutely incredible through the tale that may seem. Yet it comes on very good authority. It was related to our informant, Mr. D, by Mrs. C, whose daughter he employed as a governess. Mrs. C, who was described as a woman of respectable position and good education, heard it in her turn from her father and mother. In the story, the relationship of the different persons seems a little involved, but it would appear that the initial A belongs to the name of both Mrs. C's father and grandfather. The ghost was commonly called Corny by the family, and he answered to this name, though it was not his proper name. He disclosed this latter to Mr. C's mother, who forgot it. Corny made his presence manifest to the A family shortly after they had gone to reside in the street following manner. Mr. A had sprained his knee badly and had to use a crutch, which at night was left at the head of his bed. One night his wife heard someone walking on the lobby, thump, 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 as if imitating Mr. A. She struck a match to see if the crutch had been removed from the head of the bed, but it was still there. From that on, Corning commenced to talk, and he spoke every day from his usual habitat, the coal cellar off the kitchen. His voice sounded as if it came out of an empty barrel. He was very troublesome and continually played practical jokes on the servants, who, as might be expected, were in terror of their lives of him, so much so that Mrs. A could hardly induce them to stay with her. They used to sleep in a press bed in the kitchen, and in order to get away from Corny, they asked for a room at the top of the house, which was given to them. Accordingly, the press bed was moved up there. The first night they went to retire to bed after the change, the doors of the press were flung open, and Corny's voice said, "Ha ha, you devils! I'm here before you. I am not confined to any particular part of this house." Corny was continually tampering with the doors and straining locks and keys. He only manifested himself in material form to two persons, to Blah, who died from fright, and to Mr. A, Mrs. C's father, when he was about 7 years old. The latter described him to his mother as a naked man with a curl on his forehead and skin like a clothes horse. One day a servant was preparing fish for dinner. She laid it on the kitchen table while she went elsewhere for something she wanted. When she returned, the fish had disappeared. She therefore began to cry, fearing she would be accused of making away with it. The next thing she heard was the voice of Corny from the coal cellar saying, "There, you blubbering fool, is your fish for you." And, suiting the action to the word, the fish was thrown out on the kitchen floor. Got a sense of humor. Relatives from the country used to bring presents of vegetables, and these were often hung up by Corny like Christmas decorations around the kitchen. There was one particular press in the kitchen he would not allow anything into. He would throw it out again. A crock with meat and pickle was put into it, and a fish placed on the cover of the crock. He threw the fish out. Silver teaspoons were missing, and no account of them could be got until Mrs. A asked Corny to confess if he had done anything with them. He said, "They're under the ticking in the servant's bed." He had, so he said, a daughter in Bubba Street, and sometimes announced that he was going to see her and would not be here tonight. On one occasion, he announced that he was going to have company that evening, and if they wanted any water out of the soft water tank, to take it before going to bed, as he and his friends would be using it. Subsequently, that night, 5 or 6 distinct voices were heard, and next morning the water in the tank was as black as ink. And not alone that, but the bread and butter in the pantry were streaked with the marks of sooty fingers. A clergyman in the locality, having heard of the doings of Corny, called to investigate the matter. He was advised by Mrs. A to keep quiet and not to reveal his identity, as being the best chance of hearing Corny speak. He waited a long time, and as the capricious Corny remained silent, he left at length. The servants asked, "Corny, why did you not speak?" And he replied, I could not speak while that good man was in the house." The servants sometimes used to ask him where he was. He would reply, "The great God would not permit me to tell you. I was a bad man, and I died the death." He named the room in the house in which he died. Corny constantly joined in any conversation carried on by the people of the house. One could never tell when a voice from the coal cellar would erupt into the dialogue. He had his likes and dislikes. He appeared to dislike anyone that was not afraid of him, and would not talk to them. Mrs. C's mother, however, used to get good of him by coaxing. An uncle, having failed to get him to speak one night, took the kitchen poker and hammered at the door of the coal cellar, saying, "I'll make you speak." But Corny wouldn't. Next morning the poker was found broken in two. The uncle used to wear spectacles, and Corny used to call him Four Eyes. An uncle named Richard came to sleep one night, and complained in the morning that the clothes were pulled off him. Corny told the servants in great glee, "I slept on Master Richard's feet all night." Finally, Mr. A made several attempts to dispose of his lease, but with no success, for when intending purchasers were being shown over the house and arrived at Corny's domain, the spirit would begin to speak, and the would-be purchaser would fly off. They asked him if they changed house, would he trouble them. He replied, "No, but if they throw down this house, I will trouble the stones." At last, Mrs. A appealed to him to keep quiet, and not to injure people who had never injured him. He promised that he would do so, and then said, "Mrs. A, you will be all right now, for I see a lady in black coming up the street to this house, and she will buy it." Within half an hour, a widow called and purchased the house. Possibly Corny is still there, for our informant looked up the directory as he was writing, and found the house marked vacant. Your Blanchardstown is a house occupied at present, or up to the very recently, by a private family. It was formerly a monastery, and there are said to be secret passages in it. Once a servant ironing in the kitchen saw a figure of a nun approach the kitchen window and look in. Our informant also was told by a friend, now dead, who had it from the lady of the house, that once night falls, no doors can be kept closed. If anyone shuts them, almost immediately they're flung open again with the greatest violence and apparent anger. If left open, there is no trouble or noise, but light footsteps are heard, and there is a vague feeling of people passing to and fro. The persons inhabiting the house are matter-of-fact, unimaginative people who speak of this as if it were an everyday affair. So long as we leave the doors unclosed, they don't harm us. Why should we be afraid of them? Mrs. Bloss said. Truly a most philosophical attitude to adopt. A haunted house in Kingston County, Dublin, was investigated by Professor W. Barrett and Professor Henry Sidgwick. The story is singularly well attested, as one might expect from its being inserted in the pages of the proceedings as PR, as the apparition was seen on 3 distinct occasions, and by 3 separate persons, who were all personally known to the above gentlemen. The house in which the following occurrences took place is described as being a very old one, with unusually thick walls. The lady saw her strange visitant in her bedroom. She says, disliking cross-lights, I had got in the habit of having the blind of the back window drawn and the shutters closed at night, and of leaving the blind raised and the shutters open toward the front, liking to see the trees and sky when I awakened. Opening my eyes now, one morning, I saw right before me, this occurred in July 1873, the figure of a woman stooping down and apparently looking at me. Her head and shoulders were wrapped in a common woolen shawl. Her arms were folded, and they were also wrapped as if for warmth. In the shawl, I looked at her in my horror, and dared not cry out lest I might move the awful thing to speech or action. Behind her head I saw the window, and the growing dawn, the looking-glass upon the toilet table, and the furniture in that part of the room. After what may have been only seconds of the duration of this vision, I cannot judge. She raised herself and went backwards towards the window, stood at the toilet table, and gradually vanished. I mean, she grew by degrees transparent, and that, through the shawl and the gray dress she wore, I saw the white muslin of the table cover again, and at last saw that only in the place where she had stood. The lady lay motionless, with terror, until the servant came to call her. The only other occupants of the house at the time were her brother and the servant, to neither of whom did she make any mention of the circumstance, fearing that the former would laugh at her, and the latter give her notice. Here is a footnote, July 3, 1884. Exactly a fortnight later, when sitting at breakfast, she noticed that her brother seemed out of sorts, and did not eat. On asking him if anything were the matter, he answered, I've had a horrid nightmare. Indeed, it was no nightmare. I saw it early this morning, just as distinctly as I see you. What? She asked, A villainous-looking hag, he replied, with her head and arms wrapped in a cloak, stooping over me and looking like this. He got up, folded his arms, and put himself in the exact posture of the vision, whereupon she informed him of what she herself had seen a fortnight previously. About 4 years later, in the same month, the lady's married sister and 2 children were alone in the house. The eldest child, a boy of about 4 or 5, asked for a drink, and his mother went to fetch it, desiring him to remain in the dining room until her return. Coming back, she met the boy pale and trembling, and on asking him why he left the room, he replied, "Who is that woman? Who is that woman?" "Where?" she asked. "The old woman who went upstairs," he replied. So agitated was he, that she took him by the hand and went upstairs to search, but no one was to be found, though he still maintained that a woman went upstairs. A friend of the family subsequently told him that a woman had been unalived in the house many years previously, and that it was purported to be haunted. Okay, so there we go. We'll stop there, because then chapter 2 starts, and it's going to be haunted houses and contact. So we will continue with this next week. Whoop, let me get this down. I gotta get my, where is it? I'm sure I'll find it. I'm trying to find the, I'll find it. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. So we got to read a book and a half, which is kind of, or the last of the other book and then part of this book. I'm looking forward to this one. There's a lot of Irish folklore, a lot of Irish legends out there, and these are supposed to be true, so that's exciting. So we'll continue this next week. But it's been pretty fun. It's been pretty fun to do the read and all that good stuff, and I enjoy doing this for you guys. We do have a guest coming up on the 18th. We're going to be talking about some weird news topics and stuff, so I'm going to get that arranged and then get that rolling. But there's just 2 guests. There's this gentleman coming on Tuesday and then Nancy on Friday. And then next week we're going to have it pretty. We're going to have it pretty packed. We're going to have it pretty packed with guests. So as we start stacking up and get going with the show. So thank you guys for coming tonight. I will be back tomorrow at 7 p.m. Pacific, or thereabouts, doing free tarot card readings over on TikTok and maybe Clapper, or maybe even favorited. So we'll see where I end up. But I will be back. But I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. And like I said, we're going to keep reading. And we got a nice book we're reading now. We'll continue with this one next week. And there's about 4 or 5 other true ghost story books in the collections on this. So we'll have plenty of reading material for a while. All right, everybody. I want to thank you all. And have a good... Don't disappear over here. Stay here. Okay. And have a good night over Clapperland. Let me do that. All right, TikTok. It's been fun. And hopefully I see you tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Pacific, and we're going to do some free readings and stuff, and maybe eat some green eggs and ham. I don't know. We'll figure something out. Eat some Irish food tomorrow while we're on the air. How's that sound? All right. Thank you all, and I appreciate each and every one of you. And wow. And thank you for the skulls. Thank you for the skulls. I did not see. I wasn't able to see them. Thank you so much. I so appreciate it. Yeah, feel free. If you have a ghost story of your own, I want to have a ghost story night. So if you guys have ghost stories that you know, do me a favor. Email those ghost stories to me on TikTok, and we'll put together a ghost story night. Okay? I'll even have you guys on as guests. If you got enough followers, I'll have you on as guests to tell your ghost stories. Okay? Thank you so much over here. Have a great evening. Thank you for the guests. Moderators, thank you. See you tomorrow. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much, and you guys know where to find me. I'll be back here on Tuesday. Whoa, wrong mic. Keep forgetting where I'm at. I'll be back here on Tuesday, with my guest at 5:30 p.m. Pacific. I'll get all that set up tonight and tomorrow. But like I said, I'm starting to stack up guests, so there will be more coming out for California Haunts Radio. I've just been focusing a lot over at TikTok and trying to build that up, and then with the band, everything with that got messed up, with the finances, and had to work my way through that. Excuse me. But I think I've got all that figured out. Hopefully we don't go on a ban again. But I'll be back working with you guys, and as you can see, we just got our 1,000th subscriber, so I'm really excited over here on YouTube. So that excites me. So I'm going to be doing a lot more. We're going to start hitting the road here and going places. And there's a baby giraffe that was born at the Sacramento Zoo. We're going to go see that. We're going to make a trip to the zoo. We're going to go to the Walt Disney Museum, and we're going to be doing all kinds of things. So I will see you guys, and have a great evening. And hopefully come on over to California Haunts on TikTok and have a visit. Get a free 3 card reading. I also do private readings as well. So if you're interested in that, shoot me an email. Shoot me an email. Okay, guys, have a great evening, and I will see you tomorrow.